The FA Cup dream is over for Brighton as they exit on penalties after losing 4-3 to Nottingham Forest at the Amex. The potential of Wembley was just a game away, but unfortunately penalties missed by Jack Hinchelwood and Diego Gomez meant that Forest progressed through to the semi-finals. Hello and welcome back to INMR, where in today's podcast I'm going to be analysing that game between Brighton and Nottingham Forest and looking at the areas where Brighton needed to improve throughout the match. So let's start then with the shape of both teams. Brighton out of possession set up in a 4-4-2, which obviously was much more cautious than the way that they approached this game at the City ground in the Prem. Two banks of four with Ruta and Welbeck pressing as that front pair. When they had possession, it almost shifted into a back three as either Estupiñán or Hinchelwood would push up to support their winger and overload the flanks. This game was going to always be won and lost in the midfield, and I don't think Brighton grasped that quickly enough. They needed to use the wings far more, and although they had the fullbacks pushing up, they weren't moving the ball quickly enough to pose a problem to Nottingham Forest's disciplined defence. For Nottingham Forest, when they had the ball, and in the first half they had a lot of it, they played a 4-1-5. Now this photo doesn't show it too well because Van Heck's actually on the ball, but this is from a quick turnover, and Forest did just have the ball, and you can sort of see here where that front five was trying to overload Brighton's back four, with Morgan Gibbs-White the focal point in midfield, orchestrating the attacks, either playing it out to the right, the left, or into those central areas where there were three attackers. This worked really well, and Brighton did struggle, especially in the second half with the pace of Elanga, who we'll get onto later. Out of possession, Forest alternated between a 4-4-2 and a 4-3-3. When Brighton had the ball in dangerous areas, they more sat back in that low block, obviously very disciplined, but when there were opportunities a little higher up the pitch, one man would leave that four in midfield and create a 4-3-3 where they'd almost go man for man in midfield. You'd have one player rushing towards the ball and the other two covering the passing options. Forest made it difficult for Brighton to break through by congesting the midfield, and the Albion did struggle due to their slow ball movement and overcomplicated play in midfield. A perfect example here is when Danny Welbeck had the ball, and yes, Mitoma needs to time his run better, but a lot of times there were situations like this where Mitoma was onside and Welbeck just needs to slot a ball through, but instead he takes lots of little unnecessary touches and gets tackled. This happened all throughout the game. The simple pass was on, but people were trying to take too much time on the ball, which Forest just eat up so easily. Due to Forest's disciplined defence, when Brighton regained possession they needed to play quickly to catch them out, but they just didn't do that at all until probably the last 10 minutes of extra time. This season, Balaba's influence on Brighton has been crucial, but this game you really saw that because of how little he had the ball. Brighton lacked creativity because they couldn't get the ball into midfield for Balaba to orchestrate play. The Cameroon international had the least touches of any outfield players to play 90 minutes with just 55. As I mentioned earlier, Forest dominated possession in the early stages and had the better chances. One chance here from Awoniyi. Verbruggen made a great save, but it was just far too easy for Aina to get the ball into Awoniyi, as it was in the 7-0 defeat. It seemed a lot of the time that Brighton was so scared of losing that they just really sat back and tried to absorb pressure, but when Forest move the ball as quickly as they do, there's always going to be these little leaks where a player can get a shot off. Forest's game plan was all about the wide play and the set pieces. They played a brilliant couple of balls out wide, and the reason for this was even if the ball couldn't get into the box after playing it out wide, Forest were targeting Brighton's weakness at defending set pieces. They were trying so much just to win corners as they knew Brighton have struggled in this area throughout the campaign, and Forest have scored 8 Premier League goals from corners this season, which is I think the third best in the league. Van Heck was key in clearing crosses and defending those set pieces, but it still is a massive weakness for the Albion. In the second half, there was a few tactical adjustments made and some more key moments from Brighton. They started the half much sharper, with Mitoma playing better as he was causing problems for Aina by cutting inside and actually driving forward. The penalty incident for Mitoma was fortunate. He did lunge in super unnecessarily, but fortunately it was his arm that made contact with Anderson, and to me it does seem as though Anderson left a bit of a trail and leg there. As you can see from this first still image, he's in full control of the ball and he can easily go through that gap between Estupiñán and Mitoma. If anything, if he'd gone through, he'd probably have won the penalty anyway because Estupiñán probably wouldn't have been in a good position to win the ball. So if he'd stuck a leg in, he'd have probably won it anyway. Despite Anderson having control of the ball, he's got that trailing leg there to try and get a bit of contact, and he did. It did look like more he was stepping on Matoma's arm rather than Matoma was hooking Anderson's foot to prevent him from going forward. So that was ruled out, and rightly so in my opinion, but Forest continued to be dangerous on the counter-attack, especially with Alanga's pace on the left-hand side. He was their standout attacker and made the Brighton defence look like they were walking through treacle in the second half. At the other end of the pitch, Brighton had issues in attack and lacked that cutting edge, often taking too long to shoot. Diego Gomez had multiple chances to win the game but didn't take them, and it's only in extra time where Brighton came to life. Obviously the header from Diego Gomez was the best one, forcing an unbelievable stop from Matt Sells, but this one here was really frustrating for me because yes, he's a young player, yes, he's not even a striker, but here he just needs to take that positive first touch forward and then shoot across his body into the bottom right corner. If Welbeck was still on the pitch, I do believe this would have been a goal. But what Diego Gomez instead does here is cut back inside where there's 1, 2, 3 defenders all waiting to clear away the danger. That is of course just the lack of experience playing out, and obviously he isn't a striker, but unfortunately this moment here is one of those what if ones where if even Pedro was in that position, would he have got the finish away, because this was so clearly a shot that needed to be taken on his left foot. In terms of the offside goal, I think Estupiñán was needlessly offside in this moment here where we thought Brighton had done it. He's already got behind Callum Hudson-Odoi. He didn't need to be offside in this moment. He would have won the ball regardless. And Forest have been so good this season at holding their line, and they must have known that, Brighton, before going into the game. So for Estupiñán to drift this far offside is really, really poor. And again, it's just that moment of what if. And that was really what this whole game was about. What if we started with the tempo that we did in the latter stages? What if Estupiñán timed his run better? What if Diego Gomez took that shot on his left foot? It's very easy to look back at it in hindsight, but there are so many moments here where that lack of experience in this Brighton side, especially once players like Danny Welbeck are coming off, you just think this is the pitfall of having such a young squad. Forest, though, remain resilient, and their defensive shape was superb throughout the entire 120 minutes. Nico Williams in particular, I thought, had Minty completely under control, reading his moves every time. Minty I was disappointed with. As each one-on-one went by and he continued to get tackled, it just got worse. Hinshelwood on that right side was effective at breaking up the play and getting it out to Minty, but unfortunately the end product from the Gambia international just wasn't good enough. And despite Brighton's possession increase in the second half, Forest continued to be dangerous on the counter as they have been all season. Finally, let's look at the shootout. Before any cup game, you know if Brighton get to penalties, they're not going to win. Their last 3 shootouts they've lost, Bart Verbruggen's never saved a penalty for Brighton, and in this game in particular, there weren't enough senior figures in the squad there to take a penalty. That being said, I do think Hinshelwood taking third was ridiculous. You had Pervis Estupiñán on the pitch, who is Ecuador's penalty taker. Lewis Dunk, I think, should have gone earlier. Yes, he's just come back from injury, but he's an experienced player in the squad. He's captain, and we know he can take penalties. Given a 19-year-old that huge responsibility of being one of the players to send his boyhood club to Wembley, I mean, he just looked petrified. You must be thinking as a 19-year-old lad, oh my God, I could send my club to Wembley here. I could score one of the penalties to send my team to Wembley for just the 3rd time in their history, and he just looked absolutely terrified. His first ever shootout as well. I do think it should have been Estupiñán, then Dunk 3rd and 4th, before you're even looking at getting 19-year-old Jack Hinshelwood to take one. He's not to blame at all in my opinion, and of course Matt Sells is exceptional in shootouts. We've seen that this season. Forest have progressed through 3 rounds now in this campaign via a penalty shootout, and the feeling always was that if it went to penalties, Forest would have the upper hand. And of course in this final one here, Bart Verbruggen needs to be doing better. He got a hand to it, he just went through him. Ryan Yates shouldn't have scored that in my opinion, and it's just a shame that Verbruggen's an excellent shot stopper, but when it comes to these closed situations in a game, such as penalties, he's just unbelievably out of his depth. So they are all my thoughts on the Brighton game. Let me know what parts of my analysis you agree with. Everyone is going to see it differently. But overall, Brighton's lack of tempo and fear of losing again is what cost them here. If they'd started with the tempo that they showed in the final 10 minutes of extra time, I really do think they could have won this. But there is still a chance for Brighton to get Europe through their league placings, so be sure to let me know in the comments where you think Brighton will end up at the end of this season. That is where I'm going to end today's podcast, but there are plenty of others you can go and listen to. For more content, be sure to check out my website, that's inmrfootball.co.uk. On there you can find match reports, live blogs, club updates and so much more. And if that's not enough, INMR is also on X and Instagram, so you can follow me on both of those platforms for even more daily football content. Thank you very much for listening, and I will see you in the next one.